everyone. Welcome to the Money Maverick podcast, the show that Wall Street doesn't want you to listen to. I'm Tim Turley, the host for today's episode. We're coming to you from the Money Maverick studio in Salt Lake City, Utah. Today's guest, Maverick, is the ultimate money maverick. And he is the driving inspiration for why we started this podcast series. We'll probably have Kyle on our show multiple times because of what we can learn from him. And I'm so excited to have him here. Let me give you a little background on Kyle. He currently lives in the great state of Texas with his amazing wife of 24 years, Amber. They have been blessed with 3 daughters. Kyle himself graduated from Utah State University and served a church mission, a service mission in Brazil for 2 years. Kyle has been in the financial planning and insurance business for more than 23 years, and he is a certified financial planner. Kyle's the founder of 5th, which is an organization that teaches financial advisors how to become principles-based financial planners. In conjunction with that, he created the only principles-based financial planning software that exists, which is called Personal Financial Snapshot. He is also the founder of Unique Advantage, which is a principles-based financial planning firm, of which I'm a part of, by the way, in full disclosure. A few years ago, Kyle wrote and published his first book called Principles-Based Planning, which is available on Amazon. That is a game changer of a book. And what it does, it helps advisors and clients see why the popular approach to financial planning has failed and why a principles-based approach is much more effective at helping people become financially free. Kyle's favorite addictions are serving in his church, traveling with his family, reading, and fishing, with a huge emphasis, all caps, on fishing at the end, if you ever get to know Kyle. Kyle, I am so excited to have you on here, and there's a reason why you are the first Maverick guest on the show. You've inspired many people. Again, you're the reason probably why I started this podcast, and my life is better from knowing you personally and professionally. And I'm so excited for people to be able to hear you. And we could probably have a 3-hour continuous podcast talking with you. And I personally it wouldn't be long enough for me. But we don't have that time. So we're going to get to some specifics. So welcome to the show, Kyle.
Hey, thank you so much, Tim. And I feel likewise about you, that you're making a very positive impact on my life, and we'll help each other.
Yeah, that's the idea, is to help each other. I wanted to get right into some tips that you might have, or some reasons behind why you wrote the book and started this software for principles-based instruction and education. And you have free reign. I just want people to hear your story and what was the evolution of you getting to the point where you realized there was something better to help people out, and why did you write the book and that kind of thing. Just tell us a little background.
Awesome. Well, so in 1999, I'll go back to 1999 when I started in this business in the financial planning world. What drew me to the financial planning world was a book by Robert Kiyosaki, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So that, along with there was a kind of a mentor in my church that had a good influence on me. I loved the way he could dedicate his life, the time of his day, to the things that he thought was most important. So I wanted to find out what he did. I found out later that he was in the financial services industry. But prior to that, I was going to be a physical therapist. So I had been taking all those courses in college and working towards that. But I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I just loved the dichotomy of what he presents in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is, his poor dad wasn't necessarily really a poor dad, but he did it the traditional way, which is you get a high education, and then you get a good job with a good company that has good benefits, and you save in retirement plans, and then when you go to retire, you'll have a pension, and you'll have your 401k or your retirement account, and you'll have your Social Security. And he talks a lot about how his dad ended up, that didn't work out very well for his real dad. And his rich dad, which was his friend's dad, according to the book, had a whole different approach to finances and dealing with money. And his approach was more invest in yourself, in your own ideas, in the things you can control, and the things that you have an influence on, things that you're an expert. Don't rely on your employer, and don't rely on the government to try and, to become financially free. And so that got me thinking about, the whole philosophy of financial planning. And I feel like that really drew me into the financial planning world, because I knew so many people personally who just struggled with money their whole lives. They never became financially free. They were always just working for money and never the other way around. So that's kind of the genesis of where it began.
Okay, so that's awesome. And many of our guests are going to refer to Rich Dad, Poor Dad as being a good starter book, so to speak, that kind of changed their mindset and their paradigm. I know it did with me. I started with a traditional captive, full service financial agency. And when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I realized that I couldn't continue working with that agency, because I was kind of doing the wrong thing for people without knowing it, which is a common theme, of course, of why you probably started the 5th Training Corp organization as well, is because most financial planners and advisors out there are probably really, really good people. They just don't know that they're probably leading people down a path that's not going to work too well. Then they just don't know it, because that's what they train. So I'm glad you brought up that book.
Yeah.
And I know you have all those books. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to what you just said there. I agree. I think by far the majority of people that I've ever met in the financial services industry are in the industry for the right reason. They really want to help people. But the problem is where are they getting the information from? Who's quote training them on what to say and what to do and what's the right thing. So we'll probably get into that a little bit, but I call that the accumulation theory.
Yeah, and we will get into that, because that's important. And again, we know when we started this the Money Maverick podcast that by telling the truth, that may offend some people. Some people may get their feathers ruffled, and but that shouldn't stop us from teaching principles and teaching truths, because it ultimately helps people. And so we're never going to be apologetic for going against the herd, so to speak, and teaching what really works. And unfortunately, that hasn't been taught for a long time. So we're out to change that with this, with guests like you, and the book that you wrote, which I highly recommend people read. We'll talk about that at the end. So that kind of gave you a mind shift of studying physical therapy, which is really weird. I don't even know if you and I have even said that, talked about this, but that's actually what I was going to do before I got into financial planning. Is in fact, you live in Texas. I was really close to joining the Army, because they had a really good physical therapy school at Baylor University, through the Army. And you get your studies and you do your 3 years, and then you can kind of go. I was just afraid I was going to end up in Barstow, California for like the next 10 years on an Army base or something. So I didn't do that. But yeah, so we have a similar path. I don't think you and I have even mentioned that. That's interesting. So you started shifting towards true principles and the way money really worked. What got you to the point where you wrote the book? And we're trying to get this book out, by the way. It changed my life. When I got reacquainted with Kyle several years ago, I got his book, and I I devoured it. I think I stayed up most of the night reading it, and I finished reading it on the plane ride home. And but what led up to your wanting to write this book, or your motivation for doing that? Tell us about that.
Well, the specific audience for my book is actually the financial planning industry. So I don't know of any other financial book, especially that's in line with the philosophy that we teach, that was written to financial planners. The rest of them are kind of written to the general public. And so that's what made me want to write the book. I'm kind of writing to the industry to say, hey, what we're doing as an industry is hurting people. It's not helping people. And there's a better approach. And so that was why I wrote the book.
That's awesome. So what do you think? Why do you think it's so difficult for people to learn how to create financial freedom? Why is there such a why is the conventional wisdom of how to quote unquote retire successfully, why is that pervasive? And why hasn't the industry, the professional industry, why don't they teach principles? I'm sure some of them maybe do, but what's happened? What's happened to the traditional industry for the last 50 or 60 years? Well, how did it get to that way? And how can people have never been taught the difference between being truly financially free versus just retiring and quitting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is multifaceted, right? So I would start with one, it's really hard for people to admit when they're wrong. I know that is for me. It probably is for most people. And so, it kind of is that idea that if you repeat something enough times, then it must be true, right? And so the idea, kind of the default wisdom or the conventional wisdom is go to work, save in your 401k, get at least the match, right? And that's going to somehow work out in the face of, right? In the face of the glaring facts of the matter, which I just looked those up to make sure I wasn't going to quote those wrong. But the average 401k balance, according to Vanguard, and this is, your audience could look this up on NerdWallet. Go to Google and just do NerdWallet average and median balance of 401k balance based on age. And so for 65 plus year olds, the average balance is about $222,000. The median balance is about $70,000 median. So 65
That's
plus years.
incredible. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
it's incredible. Nobody can look at that honestly and say, wow, that was a great success across the board. Now, they may say, well, it's been a failure, but they may say, well, it's a failure on the individual's part. They aren't saving enough money, they spend too much, they're in debt. And all of that may be true as well, right? We do live in a very consumerist society, and people don't save very much. In fact, recent statistics are showing that the U.S. as a nation, we're at the highest level of credit card debt we've ever had across the nation. So we're spenders. But that also points to the failure of the traditional planning model, which is obviously not motivating. It's not motivating to people. And then another facet of it is the focus on retirement. Okay. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to look up the definition of the word retirement. Retirement does not mean that you are able to do anything you want to do and schedule your time the way you want to schedule it without worrying about money. Retirement actually just means quitting your job. It means quitting your job. It doesn't mean you have any capability of doing anything, and it's based on an age. So the financial industry is hyper focused on this ultimate objective of retirement. And nobody is talking about financial freedom. The financial services industry doesn't talk about financial freedom. And so
Why not, Kyle?
Well, so that leads to the last, I guess, major facet of why people are failing so miserably in the area of money, and it's that financial institutions' objective and your objective as an individual are at odds with each other. They're not symbiotic. Okay. So what is the objective of every financial institution? I'm not just talking about Wall Street. I'm talking about banks. I'm talking about insurance companies, Wall Street, brokerages, etc. They all have the same objective, and that is assets under management. They want to get as much money from you and I as possible, and they want to hold on to it as long as possible, and if possible, give back nothing. Okay, or as little as possible, right? So that's their goal. And if they're going to be the ones training the financial planning world on what to do and what to say, and in fact, if you're securities licensed, you have to be compliant. And look up the definition of the word compliant. It's a little bit scary, actually. But if you're a securities rep, you have to be compliant. You have to do what they tell you to do. Okay. In other words, you can't, in my opinion, you can't be a fiduciary. Okay. If you're that, because a fiduciary is supposed to be doing what's best for the client in all cases. Okay. And the financial industry doesn't do that. They're not training to do that. They're training to get assets under management. They're not training to help their clients become financially free. And actually, what the financial services industry offers as far as products go are not designed to cause people to be financially free. We could talk more about that too at some point.
So back up a little bit. There's a trend in the financial planning world, financial advising world, to become quote unquote fiduciaries, to do what's best in the client's interest all the time. And so they become fee-based. Apparently, they just charge a significant annual retainer, basically, a fee to give advice and not receive commissions on products or something like that. So what's the issue with that? Do you automatically become a pure fiduciary financial planner for people because you go 100% fee-based and nothing else? What's the issue with that?
Well, it still points to assets under management. And the reason I can say that with surety is that the statistics, actually, the facts are only 49% of Americans can afford $1,000 unexpected expense. 49% of Americans. So 61% of the entire population can't afford $1,000 unexpected expense. Can they, who probably need financial planning the most, can they afford to pay that fee?
Yeah, no.
And will any financial planner work with them anyway, voluntarily? Do they want to work with them?
No, exactly not. In fact, that 49% number today, I mean, we're August of 2023 on this recording. That number might be 20% or 25% can afford $1,000.
Yeah, could be lower.
Yeah,
could be lower. But the point is the financial planning, the financial planning industry is geared towards serving people who are already highly successful.
Yeah.
They're not geared towards helping people become highly successful. It's hey, I only want to work with people who have $1 million net worth, or I only want to work with people who have $500,000 that I can roll over, right? The rollover, by the way, the rollover industry, that's basically the entire securities industry, right? They only survive on rolling people's money over. They don't survive by creating wealth. They don't actually create wealth. They only make money by rolling people's money over to something else, and then they draw a fee, right? So that's it. Their goal is not helping people be financially free. And yeah, the fiduciary thing, it's an attempt, right? But here's the thing: can you pass laws that make people ethical, that are not going to be ethical?
No.
Laws don't make people ethical, right? It's designed to catch people when they, but it's kind of like saying, hey, we're gonna make a rule in basketball that if you hit somebody in the face while they're shooting a basket, then it's a foul, right? But it's only a foul if the ref calls it,
Right.
right? Otherwise, they get away with it, right? And it's not happening. So you would think if we're saying, hey, people should be a fiduciary, if we make a rule like that, that's like making the rule that you can't foul a person shooting the basketball. Of course, that's not going to eliminate fouls, right?
Right.
In
Right.
basketball, you can make all the rules you want, but people are still going to foul. And so, I think it's up to each individual planner to just commit to doing what's right for the client. And I think most people in the financial services industry really do want to do that. But I don't think the financial planning institutions, like the financial institutions themselves, are doing that. That's not their goal. Their goal is not to help the client become financially free. I want to make that really clear.
And again, why wouldn't that be their goal? Isn't that what everybody should be, every type of professional should be helping a client do? Why is that not the goal?
Because it's contrary to assets under management. That's why. Because if the goal was, hey, let's make people, so here's the thing, financial institutions want to make who financially free?
Themselves,
right? So they're going to do what we teach. One of our principles that we teach is called velocity of money. They're going to practice velocity of money. They're going to get many uses of their money, as many times as possible throughout the years to come, right? They're going to put their money into something, get it back as quickly as possible, put it into something else, get it back as quickly as possible, use it over and over again. They're going to use the principle of leverage, right? Are they encouraging individuals to do that? No. They're encouraging people to put money into accounts that they can't touch unless they're penalized, right? Unless they are willing to pay a penalty until 59 and a half years old. So, new person coming out of college, gets a job, has a 401k, puts money into it. How many decades does he not touch his money?
Yeah, four,
Yeah,
basically.
possibly 4 decades.
Maybe,
Yep.
yeah.
And how much cash flow does he get during that time?
None.
And how much control or influence does he have over the outcome?
Very little to none.
Little to none. Would a financial institution ever put their money into something that they couldn't touch for 4 decades, that provides no cash flow, that they're not experts in, and they have zero control or influence over the outcome?
Yeah, they would never do that.
They would never do that. So everybody knows that, but they have never really thought about it that clearly, right? And that's my book brings that out. And our principles and our process that we take our clients through with Unique Advantage brings that out. It makes it very clear that that's the contradiction, right? That's why financial institutions aren't in the business of making people financially free, nor will they ever be, right? Nor will they ever be. They can't be, okay? They can't be, because becoming financially free is who's going to get the velocity on the money. That's who's going to become financially free. So if financial institutions give up control and use of the money, and the client uses the money to get real assets, which, by the way, financial institutions can't sell, okay, and they can't manage for fees, then the financial institutions don't get a hold on to the money long enough to velocitize it themselves, right? So they're never going to encourage that principle for the client. They're always going to encourage accumulation.
Interesting. So you mentioned the word real assets. Let's go back to Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He, I would imagine we would call him a money maverick, right? He's just kind of flown in the face of traditional financial advice, obviously. And that's why he's sold so many books. And one of the things that he challenges people on is what he calls fake assets, right? So you mentioned the word real assets, which, cash flowing assets, for example, but why does he call certain assets fake assets? What does he mean by that?
Well, in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he says that there's one thing that you need to know. If you ever want to become financially free, there's one thing, and he says it's absurdly simple, but it's true. This is the one thing you have to know. The difference between an asset and a liability, he says. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And he says that millions of people are putting money into liabilities that they think are assets.
What's
Okay.
the number one? What's the number one liability people think is an asset that's not?
Oh, for sure, homes and cars, right? If you think about where do people put the majority of their money, I would say probably, especially now, across the country, I'd say the average person is putting in this is average Joe, right? Putting in more than $1,000 a month into their home, right? The average Joe is not saving $12,000 a year, right? But they're putting $12,000 or more in their home, and then if you add a car to it, it's more like 24,000 or somewhere in that range, right? They're not saving that much money in most cases, right? Yeah, people who are making $250,000 or more are probably saving or have the ability to save more than that, but they're also probably paying $2,000 or $3,000 a month on their house, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that Robert Kiyosaki just simplifies it. That's what makes all of his books so valuable, is that he takes such a complex topic as personal finances and he makes it make sense. He puts it in a story. Whether the rich dad's true or not doesn't matter. It's the story, it's the principles that matter. And he just says, look, an asset puts money in your pocket, a liability takes money out of your pocket. And if you understand that, then you should focus on buying assets, right? If you want to ever become financially free, you have to get assets.
Oh, that's great. And isn't that really the end goal, is to do what the banks do, not what they tell us to do, which is get good, hardworking assets that work on your behalf?
Yeah. And it's not that we can't use financial institutions for our benefit. We just can't play the game the way that they want us to play. And I mentioned, I'm just going to add one thing real quick, if it's okay.
Yes.
I said that financial institutions can't sell real assets. And that's true. Because if you say, hey, a real asset, if you adopt the idea that a real asset is something that puts money in my pocket, what financial product that financial institutions create is actually designed to do that actually produces income to you? It's not very many, right? And it's definitely not the most popular things that exist. Those are things that are designed not to produce income at all. They're actually they'll penalize you if you take income, right? And so, I just think it's important that people realize, hey, I'm in this battle over the use and control of my money, and whoever gets the most velocity on my money is who wins, right? That's who becomes financially free.
That is so interesting. So, we've talked about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What are some other books that have influenced you greatly? If you were to name a few more, several more, you are a voracious reader. I don't know how you read as many books as you do. And you've inspired me. I've always been an avid reader since I was a little kid. But I think I'm reading more books than I did before, because you always recommend so many great books. So what are a few that stick out to you that have influenced you?
I mean, classics that I think of, or at least, and I'll talk about more modern ones, but the classics would be like Richest Man in Babylon, Think and Grow Rich, and then I would add all the Rich Dad series books. I would say especially Who Took My Money is so great at putting together all the principles and issues, the issues that we are faced with, the conventional wisdom. But I would say more recent books like Justin Donald's The Lifestyle Investor is fantastic. And I would encourage, so this is what I would say is even more valuable, not more, equally valuable, is to read books from highly successful people. So I've read, like Henry Ford's autobiography, Ray Dalio's book, Life and Work, right? Warren Buffett, the Snowball. I'm reading currently Walt Disney's biography. Larry Miller, if you're from Utah, you know who Larry Miller is. If you're not from Utah, you don't know who he is. But he was one of the wealthiest people in Utah for a long time, former owner of the Jazz. You read books like, oh, dang, I can't think of his name right now. The UCLA coach, John Wooden.
Coach John Wooden.
Yeah, John Wooden, leadership. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, quote, success financially. What are the ingredients to success, period, right? What are the principles that lead to success? And when you read all of those people, you find common principles among all of them. And Ray Dalio says that in his book. He says all successful people operate by principles that help them be successful, right? So what are they? That's who we should be reading from. We shouldn't be reading White Coat Investor, who's never done it, And actually, Dave Ramsey, there are some good things. I'll say this, Dave Ramsey does some good things. But what I wish he would write about is what he's done to become uber successful. Like, he's probably one of the best marketers we've ever seen in our country, right? He's built an awesome business. I want to know how to run a business from that guy. I don't want to learn, about mutual funds and 401ks from him, because he's never created any wealth from that himself. He promotes that stuff, but that's not what created his wealth. So I think finding those common principles from extremely successful people over the history of our country and in the world, you're going to find the truth. You're going to find the principles that actually lead to success.
That's awesome. And by the way, I will echo the good things that Dave Ramsey does, but I actually would like to have you back on the show to break down the good and what we wish we would hear from Dave. I think that would be worthy of a show, because so many people have been positively influenced by Dave, which we applaud. But there's some things that are, could be quite dangerous when it comes to financial freedom. So I think that might be good to have a show. We might offend a lot of people, but I think if people are open-minded, they might learn some good things. So, well, Kyle, we're going to end up the show today with our Money Maverick tip of the week. And again, I could hear your tips for 3 straight hours and not get bored at all. But we only have time for one tip. If you were to leave our audience with something practical that maybe they could take away and implement right away, what would you come up with?
I would say that my tip is to catch ourselves following the herd, right? Let's catch ourselves, because we are a herd creature. We like to be in a crowd. The phrase misery loves company is true, and if you read Atomic Habits, which is a great book by James Clear, he talks about this innate, right? It's ingrained in our DNA, innate desire to be a part of a group, because I guess back in the caveman days, if we were kicked out of the village, out of the cave, we were dead, right? It was just a death sentence. And so, it's just really ingrained in us that we want to be part of the herd. But I would just say, by far the majority of people are going to fail financially. By far the majority, they're going to fail financially. So when it comes to finances, you kind of want to be a maverick, not to be too cheesy, but you kind of need to be a maverick, not follow the herd. You kind of go the opposite of the flow, right? And if the whole crowd is going a certain direction, that should be a red flag when it comes to money. It should be a red flag that pops up in your head. Hey man, maybe we should question what's happening here. Why is this so popular? And I think you're gonna find out some important things if you do that.
That is such great advice. I love that. Kyle, as we end up, how can people get a hold of you, your firm? What are some ways that people could connect with you or see more about what you're doing?
Well, I would encourage people to read the book, Principles-Based Planning. It's on Amazon. It's also, there's an ebook as well if you don't like the paperback, but we're so digitally, like, I'm in front of a computer every day. So I think reading a physical book is like going on vacation. And, our website, uniqueadvantage.biz, uniqueadvantage.biz. And I would encourage people to go to the Unique Advantage website, and you can learn more about our philosophy, our principles, our process. And we'd love to hear from anybody. We don't charge fees, so we're not trying to exclude the 61% who don't have savings built up already.
Very good. Well, this has been great. I hope everyone learned some really key tips and maybe had a paradigm shift with listening to you. So thank you so much, Kyle Christensen, and we're looking forward to having you back on again. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.